introduce the next speaker, Dr. Jaroslav Skira, who is the inaugural dean of Regis St. Michael's, a new federation of Regis College, and the University of St. Michael's College, Faculty of Theology. He is Director of Advanced Degrees, and he has held various teaching positions at both institutions, as well as the Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky Institute of Eastern Christian Studies and the Lviv Theological Academy, later Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. He is an Ukrainian Greek Catholic layperson and previously served as the founding director of the Graduate Center for Theological Studies at the TST. Thank you very much for coming to Vienna, and please, you can start with your presentation.
Thank you very much to the conference organizers for this invitation. I think it's really a wonderful opportunity to come together, and particularly the University of Vienna for their hospitality and hosting this. I'd like to first say to those colleagues from Ukraine and those joining of our Ukraine, to all your friends and families, that I hope you will find some solace that in our weekly liturgies at our Faculty of Theology in Toronto, we pray for Ukraine and the end of the war. This series of wonderful conferences seem to have followed a trajectory, perhaps a hidden movement of the Holy Spirit, of the pastoral, scholarly, and ecumenical attention afforded to the Eastern Catholic churches. I've used the term prophetic in my title to show how some of the key themes I will raise were already foreshadowed by Eastern Catholics at the Second Vatican Council. I will confess, too, that I was tempted to use the term subversive in my title to show how Eastern Catholic churches should claim a greater agency or voice in their place in the Catholic communion, as well as in their relations with their sister Orthodox churches. And here is my first act of subversion, calling Eastern Catholic churches sister churches, not only in their relations within the Catholic communion, but also with Orthodox churches. My open questions are thus whether or not, or to what degree, the Orthodox churches will find acceptable roles for Eastern Catholics in a vision of fuller communion, and what transformative role the Eastern Catholic churches might play within the Catholic Church itself. These are complex issues requiring us all to continue a truth and reconciliation process together in a spirit of love. Related to these points, I think I should say a few things about my own context, which I pray will be seen as hopeful, kind, and will explain my own hermeneutic in dealing with the topic of Eastern Christianity. I am a Ukrainian Greco-Catholic or Eastern Catholic from Canada, living outside the traditional canonical territories of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church, and in a church, though fairly large in Canada, is still relatively small in comparison to the Roman Catholic Church. One other facet of my own lived experience may be of interest here, if only to illustrate the possibilities of closer and felicitous ecclesial relations. My own academic context was that of being the only full-time Eastern Christian faculty member in a Roman Catholic college situated within an ecumenical consortium of schools of the Toronto School of Theology. It has only been fairly recently that the Sheptytsky Institute of Eastern Christian Studies established itself within Toronto, alongside a slightly earlier genesis of the Orthodox School of Theology at an Anglican college. What this rich ecumenical context has allowed is a small yet flourishing Eastern Christian community, which regularly shares the same worship spaces and services of Eastern Catholics and Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Assyrian, and Oriental Orthodox. As a Ukrainian Eastern Catholic, whose family has both Eastern Catholic and Orthodox family members, I've been able to not only teach and supervise Eastern Catholic students, but to also have mutually beneficial and happy relations as the dissertation supervisor of students from the various Orthodox churches. One can cite similar academic institutions and groups like the University of Vienna here and these conference sponsors and the Institute for Ecumenical Studies which showed the indebtedness that the Eastern Catholic churches owe to the Catholic Church and to Western scholars and institutions in which Eastern scholars can promote understanding and dialogue among Eastern Catholic churches and the Orthodox churches. All of the preceding shows the immense ecumenical possibilities at the grassroots as well as the academic and institutional levels. Now, part of what supports my comments on the prophetic role of Eastern Catholic churches in Vatican II links this historical context to the Council's subsequent reception today. We should certainly laud the basic premises of Orientalium Ecclesiarum on the Eastern Catholic churches, namely that they should exhibit an authenticity in their Eastern Christian traditions of worship, spirituality, theology, and ecclesiology. Orientalium Ecclesiarum repeatedly calls for such churches to claim their voices, to have agency in their own ecclesial existence. They should cast off all things that dispossess them of that authenticity and agency, like Latinization or even neglect. Note that I've intentionally used two important terms which undergird my presentation today: authenticity and agency. These terms are related to the notion of reception. We should ask the question of the reception of Orientalium Ecclesiarum, to what degree the Eastern Catholic churches have exercised their agency in receiving the calls of Orientalium Ecclesiarum to be more fully or authentically Eastern. The Eastern Catholic Fathers at the Council regularly witness to the richness of the Christian East. Here is one prophetic dimension of their work. The other two sub-themes that are directly related to what I've just stated relate to A, the spiritual and sacramental relationship of Eastern Catholics to the Orthodox sister churches, like Communicatio and Sacris and a common liturgical traditions, and B, as well as their priority in relationship to the notions of synodality and primacy. Their polity in relationship to the notions of synodality and primacy. And this is where I think there have been some good examples of the reception of Orientalium Ecclesiarum in the Eastern Catholic churches. And I'll return to this in a moment. And the third sub-theme of Orientalium Ecclesiarum that I don't think has been sufficiently explored is found in the decree's final clauses. Quote, all these directives of law are laid down in view of the present situation until such time as the Catholic Church and the separated Eastern churches come together into complete unity, end quote. And that's Orientalium Ecclesiarum number 30. This clause remains as a cloud and unresolved issue for me as to the role and place of the Eastern Catholic churches in a vision of full ecclesial communion between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. And this is perhaps the genius of having such conferences. And here I would like to refer to Father Hyacinthe d'Esteville's recently published article on a multi-volume work edited on autocephaly, as perhaps providing some helpful indicators for our considerations. In that article, he provides an overview of two key ideas, the notions of estrangement and imperfect communion. The estrangement, citing Yves Congar, was when each church began to behave without contact with the other, wherein lay the true origins of the East-West schism. And for imperfect communion, he refers to numerous indicators to describe the close affinities that the East and the West have in terms of their theology and sacraments, including ministry, despite their estrangement. And so the question becomes, what are the antipodes to estrangement and imperfect communion? Which again, I'll unpack shortly. I may be stating the obvious to this conference's participants, but Vatican II's decree on ecumenism and to a lesser degree Orientalium Ecclesiarum were catalysts for modern ecumenical openness between the Orthodox and Catholic churches. And I would single out the interventions of Eastern Catholic fathers at the council, particularly the Melkites in the person of Patriarch Maximos and the Ukrainians in the person of Metropolitan Maxim Hermeniuk. Both were prophetic witnesses reminding the wider Catholic Church of the importance of the voice of Eastern Christians. Hermeniuk's call for the establishment of a permanent synod of bishops as advisory to the Pope seems to have come to a fuller fruition in the recent Synod on Synods. This was a similar message advanced by Patriarch Maximos. Pope Paul VI, motu proprio Apostolica Solicitudo in 1965, effectively established such a synod, though this earlier instantiation was seen as more consultative rather than deliberative. This raises the issue of how such synods are different in function from Eastern synods. At Vatican II, such affirmations of Eastern synodality by the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church coincided with the movement to seek recognition of itself as a patriarchal church or a patriarchate. The second subtheme related to Orientalium Ecclesiarium, with both the question of ecclesial polity as well as communicatio in sacris, I'll talk about right now. Here I would cite the now famous Zogby initiative, as described by Taras Kurelets on the YouTube in the previous conference. This primate of the Melkite Church had proposed that his Eastern Catholic Church could be in simultaneous communion with the Pope and with other the Sister Antiochian Orthodox Church. For him, this would include renouncing his ecclesial position on a simple profession of faith. Quote, I believe everything which Eastern Orthodoxy teaches, and I am in communion with the Bishop of Rome as the first among bishops, according to the limits recognized by the Holy Fathers of the East during the first millennium before the separation. End quote. This initiative ultimately failed, perhaps awaiting a new era of ecumenical openness. The ecumenical collaboration in the Middle East, inclusive of Eastern Catholics, and issues of pastoral care have been made possible within the Middle East Council of Churches, as described by Surya Beshialani on the YouTube videos in the previous conference. There have been modern examples of intercommunion among Syrian Orthodox and Chaldeans, as mentioned by Thomas Kramer, also in a previous conference, and of the Chaldean Catholic Patriarch's proposal to enter into communion with Orthodox churches of the Oriental Orthodox tradition. These are good examples of the reception of the Balaman document on the Eastern Catholic Church's right to existence and the rejection of unitism, and its proposals for ecumenical cooperation in pastoral matters, which manifest some semblance of imperfect communion, though other churches, other Orthodox churches, have not been so receptive to such a Balaman document. The spirit of Zogby's initiative has more recently been taken up by the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church in its affirmation of being an heir of the same Kievan Christianity as the Ukrainian Orthodox churches in Ukraine, and I know this is a complex issue, who received Christianity from the Greeks, and in its insistence that despite their entering into union with Rome in the 16th century, that the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church never broke communion with their Orthodox sister churches. Although one can easily read about the Kievan roots of Ukrainian Christianity by the Ukrainian Orthodox churches, one would be hard-pressed to find a similar reciprocity among the latter for promoting a simultaneous or double communion with the Eastern Catholic churches. The Kievan Church Study Group mentioned by Father Detsko in a previous YouTube video for this conference provides an excellent background on this initiative. Though one can nevertheless be encouraged by deeper ecumenical collaboration and dialogue, as evidenced by the recent meetings and visits of Patriarch Shevchuk and the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church to the Ecumenical Patriarch. What is prophetic about all of the above initiatives is that they were rooted in a sincere desire for Christian unity, as emerging originally from the Eastern Catholics themselves. What more importantly to my presentation is the question of the degree to which such churches could feel that they were acting as, according to Orientalium Ecclesiarium, as sui juris or particular churches in relations with other churches. Perhaps we can see here a sense of maturation of self-identity of such churches. However, if I was from the Orthodox churches, I may be perplexed by what a sui juris church is, though I would certainly recognize a church that utilized the ecclesiology of the Christian East, that spoke of an autocephalous or autonomous church seeking communion with another sister church. So if we were to appropriate Orientalium Ecclesiarium's call to retrieve Eastern traditions, then should the Eastern Catholic churches then not more fully embrace some of the language used to describe their own ecclesial polities, like autocephalous and autonomous churches and not sui juris churches, synods or synaxes instead of conferences of assemblies of bishops, patriarchs and metropolitans instead of a major archbishop? And should these Eastern ecclesial concepts not also inform how Eastern Catholics should govern themselves? In which way can Eastern Catholic churches as a whole, but also where necessary and desirable, individually express such a polity? And could we envision ways in which such an ecclesial polity can give them greater voice or agency? Even in cases of where smaller or dispersed churches exist, could we envisage ways in which they could also govern themselves and give them voice and agency? I do wish to recognize the ecumenical sensitivity and problematics of this change in self-identification by Eastern Catholics, so that such changes not be seen as establishing competitive or parallel hierarchies alongside their Orthodox sister churches, and not inflaming again tensions and accusations of proselytism or unitism. But in today's ecumenical and ecclesial context, can we really deny Eastern Catholics their voice and agency with such initiatives? One area where I think a change to an Eastern polity has de facto occurred is in the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church. Although the primate of the church is formally recognized as Major Archbishop, he is greeted as his beatitude, a greeting reserved for patriarchs, and commemorated during the liturgies, at least in the West and in North America, as patriarch. For Ukrainian Catholics, this is also reflected in who they feel is their spiritual head. In the so-called diaspora regions outside of the Ukrainian Catholic Church's canonical territories, Christmas and Easter greetings of Patriarch Shevchuk are read, and not those of the Pope. So in Ukrainian Greco-Catholic communities in the West, we can see various facets of their indigenization into their Western context, while still remaining Eastern Catholic and Christian, reflecting a very strong sense of their ecclesial communion with their primate, and retaining a strong sense of their transnationalism of Ukrainian and Eastern Christian identities with their mother church. All this has a long and at times complex history since Vatican II among Ukrainian Eastern Catholics. And I think some of the topics today will deal with this question of these diaspora churches. This theme points to the same issues of so-called diaspora churches that affect Eastern Orthodox churches, as reflected in issues of the establishment of churches in the New World, of who has authority to do so, and how such churches should be organized. This was a theme raised at the Orthodox Church's Holy and Great Council in Crete in 2016, and not satisfactorily resolved. And it's a theme raised by the Catholic Church's recent Synod on Synods. Another example of why I think we could turn to the Eastern Catholic churches as exhibiting a modern prophetic witness is through the annual gatherings of the Eastern Catholic bishops and annual conferences, which began in 1997 and regularly since 2004, I think. A perfect example of the good work that they've been done was in their 2019 publication of their proceedings, supported by the Dicastery for Christian Unity, in the book, The Ecumenical Mission of the Eastern Catholic Churches of Europe Today. Though, as I noted earlier, we should also not forget the ecumenical mission of those in diaspora regions, like myself. Here is a very good example of the teaching authority of Eastern Catholic churches, though what would have added further gravitas is if the conference formally issued some sort of common declaration. Here, Eastern Catholics could exercise their agency and teaching voice together and witness to their Eastern Christian heritage. The most recent meeting of of Eastern Catholics bishops this past fall in Romania, and it was on the relationship between priests and bishops. And although there was perhaps a good rationale for the meeting, one could ask if it was a missed opportunity to address topics on the Synod on Synods concerning the Eastern churches. In connection with the teaching authority of the Church, I'd like to single out the admirable pastoral care for his faithful of Patriarch Shevchuk, and you can watch his daily videos and homilies during the war. The Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Synod in Ukraine a few months ago published the letter of the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church in Ukraine on war and just peace in the context of new ideologies. This was in February of this year. The basic premises of that letter are rooted in an Eastern Christian anthropology of freedom and the dignity of the person. The letter also says that any peace must also be rooted in justice and the respect for international norms of law. What was very interesting for me was a reference to Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, where the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church similarly spoke of not supporting just war theories, but the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church offer a tacit critique of Fratelli Tutti by affirming that what we need is a more sophisticated explanation of what constitutes a legitimate use of violence, or to prevent further violence. And Pavlo Smitsnyuk's presentation from a past conference touched upon some of these issues of the war and just peace. However, and here's an important point I'd like to make in connection with the above themes of Eastern Catholics retrieving their Eastern identities, as well as promoting communion with their Orthodox sister churches. This letter on just peace makes no reference to any Eastern Orthodox sources, apart from an appeal of some commonly venerated Latin patristic fathers. What would such a text be like if it referenced the Ecumenical Patriarch's document for the life of the world, the social doctrine of Eastern Orthodox churches, written by theologians, not by a synod? Or if it cited the Holy and Great Council of Crete, the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church document, the ecumenical position of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is also a unique document and prophetic, as I think it's the only such document for an Eastern Catholic Church. In its opening lines, it speaks of the communion Kievan Christianity enjoyed with Rome and Constantinople. But in scanning its footnotes, there are no references to magisterial documents or official statements by the Orthodox churches. Surely, if the Eastern Catholic churches wanted to foster simultaneous communion with Rome and the Orthodox East, then they should be appealing to authoritative texts by their sister Orthodox churches. And in fact, any official church statement by any Eastern church or hierarch that has any degree of moral authority could be cited here in connection with that. And here I intentionally exclude any references to the Russian Orthodox Church, which has lost much moral authority to cite. In the same way that we openly speak about the possibility of sharing in the sacraments amongst Eastern Christians, then should we also not equally be able to affirm a sharing in teaching? I return to my theme of agency here. Patriarch Shevchuk perhaps uses similar language about Eastern Catholic churches as being subjects, not objects, and they're being catalysts for Christian witness and ecumenism. And he has not been fearful in dissenting from Rome, as in the case of criticizing the Havana Declaration between the Pope and the Russian Orthodox primate, critiquing fiducia supplicans, as well as being critical of some of the Pope's pronouncements on the Russian war. The Synod on Synods is another good example where the Eastern Catholic churches have or could claim some voice and agency. The study document from the first 2023 session listed as first the creation of a study group on the Eastern Catholic churches labeled, quote, some aspects of the relationship between the Eastern Catholic churches and the Latin Church. The Synod recognized that the diversity in the Eastern Catholic churches can contribute to the understanding and practice of synodality, and that there have been developments in the self-understanding and polity of these churches. The same document recognized some of the difficulties with pastoral resources for smaller, so-called diaspora communities. And hearkening back to the prophetic calls from Vatican II, I noted earlier, of some semblance of a council of bishops to advise the Pope, the study document specifically cites the requests by some, by whom it's not clear, to establish, quote, a council of patriarchs and major archbishops of the Eastern Catholic churches to the Holy Father, end quote, or to convoke a special synod on the Eastern Catholic churches. The rest of the proposal concerning establishing a commission of theologians to address Eastern Catholic Church topics, in addition to ensuring that the dicasteries also have adequate representation of Eastern Catholics, is mentioned. If effected, these have the potential of promoting the agency of Eastern Catholic churches to be subjects or agents rather than objects of church polity. And here I'd be interested in the insights of Dr. Peter Szabo, the coordinator of this group, one of two lay people on the study group, which had no women. And perhaps the Synod on Synod participants, some of whom here in this room could share their insights in the participation of Eastern Catholics during the Synod on Synods, and in which ways Eastern Catholics did or did not contribute to the other 9 study groups on the Synod on Synods. And now we can return to my theme of primacy, which I raised in connection with Vatican II. In Orientalem Ecclesiarum call for the Eastern Catholic churches to return to their historical roots, there are nevertheless a number of places which may seem as impediments to their full exercise of their agency as sister churches. Orientalem Ecclesiarum on 3 or 4 different occasions encourages a concrete action to be effected by Eastern Catholic churches, but is always followed with some limitation requiring Roman approbation. Father Ivan Detsko, in one of these sessions of this conference series, cited analogous issues with the Code of Canons of the Eastern churches, having around 200 similar clauses requiring approval or confirmation from Rome. For him, the autonomy of Eastern Catholics churches and the central authority or primacy of the church need resolution. Even the Synod on Synods study document recognized this as an issue in its comments on the confirmation or appointment of bishops in canonical territories and in the diaspora as quote, being a matter for discernment and dialogue with the Holy See, end quote. Certainly the new document released over the summer, the Bishop of Rome, Primacy and Synodality and Ecumenical Dialogues, in responses to the encyclical Ut Unum Sint, mentioned by my colleague Peter DeMay, contains some welcome proposals from the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity with specific references to the Eastern churches. One of the key principles of that document is the importance of connecting primacy with synodality within an ecclesiology of communion. That document recognizes the differentiated ways in which the Eastern Orthodox churches have understood Roman primacy and synodality, holding up the example of the Eastern Catholic Church's contributions at Vatican II for a permanent synod, one that includes the active participation of the laity, and the Eastern Orthodox synods is also being deliberative, not merely consultative. The Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic Church and Orthodox churches has published 3 documents related to primacy and synodality, which contain similar themes. Similar to the above document on the papacy, the Orthodox Catholic Dialogue's latest document from Alexandria continues the fundamental principles of communion ecclesiology as being normative for understanding synodality and primacy. And so I don't paint too much of an ideal picture of Eastern Orthodox polity. The issue of universal primacy and territoriality of the ecumenical patriarch have been contested within Byzantine and Slavic Eastern Orthodoxy itself. This relates particularly to the question of which body or person has the authority to declare a church's autocephaly and who has a primacy of jurisdiction outside the historical canonical territories of ancient sees, and who calls a synod of all the Eastern Orthodox churches. The example of the New Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Orthodox Church of America are examples of contested questions over autocephaly, while establishing new Orthodox exarchates in Europe or in Africa, by the Russian Orthodox, are examples of newly contested canonical jurisdiction questions. The Orthodox Council of Crete did produce a document on autonomy of churches and how it is decided, but a document on autocephaly was not even on the council's agenda. The latter document on autocephaly manifested some inter-Orthodox disputes over authority and primacy, ultimately leading the Russian Orthodox to break communion with the ecumenical patriarch over its granting of autocephaly to the New Orthodox Church of Ukraine. What I hope to have shown in my very brief presentation is that a few key themes at play in modern Orthodox ecumenism and discussions on primacy and synodality were rooted in the prophetic witness of Eastern Catholics at Vatican II. In the process of the reception of that council, in the subsequent history, some Eastern Catholic churches have endeavored to engage their Eastern Orthodox sister churches in dialogue toward growing in fuller communion. Sometimes those efforts have been met with an openness, but sometimes with a rejection. On the Catholic side, recent developments on synodality provide hopeful steps toward promoting an Eastern Catholic authenticity and for providing greater voice or agency for such churches. In other cases, some Eastern Catholic churches have already begun to exercise their authenticity, freedom, and agency in courageous and prophetic, and perhaps subversive ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We have still 10 minutes until the coffee break, so I would say we can discuss, of course, after all 4 presentations, in a broader context, but if there are questions now, then let's start with that. Microphone.